Previously on The Frog Outside the Well.
안녕하세요. Hello, Nax 선생님들, 여러분. Today's lecture is on peaceful Korean history, unique significance of few Korean surnames. And this is for NACS, the National Association of Korean Schools. Why is this the case, though? There's another why question. And if we look at these top 10 reasons here, let's look at number 1 and number 2. Korea has the longest dynasties of any country in the world, with Shilla 1,000 years, Koryo 500 years, and Chosun 500 years. Now you can say Shilla didn't go really 1,000 years, but it went a long time, okay? And the number 2 is you have peaceful transition from dynasty to dynasty. I go into this in detail on my YouTube explanation of this, but basically, Kaya was absorbed by Shilla in a largely peaceful way. The Kaya aristocracy, including Kim Yu-shin, became part of the Shilla aristocracy. They became part of the Songgol system. Chingol, they were Chingol. And Shilla was protected by Hu Goguryo. They were allies. And then when Koryo fell and Lee Seong-ge set up the Chosun dynasty, it wasn't through 10 years of fighting or 20 years of fighting or 30 years of fighting the way it is in other countries, but Lee Seong-ge basically took over in one afternoon. So again, we have a relatively peaceful transition from dynasty to dynasty. There's a lot more to be said about that, but that's not what I want to talk about today. The question then is, why does Korea have these peaceful transitions and these long dynasties? And I think the answer is on my number 7 on the top 10 list, and that is Seonbi culture, not samurai culture. And what I want to do here is compare the Seonbi to another country. It could be any other country, but Japan is close by, and it's really kind of a striking difference between the two cultures. So let's compare the two. And here again, this is number 7 in my top 10 list. If you want to look at these other ones, you can see my YouTube. Umurpake Keguri Yonguso YouTube, if you want to look these up. Japan and Korea could not be more different. They are different in every way you can look at to imagine. Most Americans think China, Korea, Japan, CKJ, rice bowls, chopsticks, it's all the same. But it could not be more different. Linguistically, culturally, every way measurable, they're very different. We see in Korea the peaceful tradition of Korean history. And even when there was warfare in Korea, civilians were commissioned as generals in many cases. The famous Koryo generals Kang Kam-chan and Kim Bu-shik were both civilians who were commissioned as generals. And during the Imjin-Weran, the Japanese invasion, a lot of the Uibyang leaders were Yangban, were civilian officials. So looking at the two societies, the two cultures, the samurai is the warrior, but the Seonbi is the scholar. It couldn't be more different. It's the pen versus the sword. With the samurai, you have short dynasties, okay? Lots and lots of war and chaos, lots of fighting, lots of bloodshed, lots of samurai. But in Korea, you have long dynasties. You have civilian rule. You have peace with a minimum of war. And in fact, one other aspect of this is Japan was proud of its feudalism, its fighting for changes of dynasty and such. But Korea developed a much more sophisticated government early on. Korea left feudalism behind late Shilla, early Koryo, and developed a centralized state. And how do you recruit people for each of these two states? In the centralized government, you recruit with an exam. It's incredible. And in the feudalistic state, you recruit by fighting. Who was the best fighters? They were the ones that were the leaders. As a result, if you look at the Japanese history, you see shorter dynasties. And it's really important to see the 3-year dynasty and the 30-year dynasty. The 30-year dynasty was Hideyoshi. And it was a period of total chaos, total bloodshed. Millions of people died. Somewhere between 2 and 4 million Koreans were killed by Hideyoshi's armies. So a lot of chaos, a lot of turmoil, a lot of changes between dynasties. There was an idea in the Japanese occupational period, the forced Japanese occupation, that shorter dynasties were better. and were more dynamic. I'm here to argue just the opposite. The longer dynasties is a symbol of peace and prosperity. Shilla had basically 3 long dynasties, 1,000 years, 500 years, 500 years. So it's a much different picture. There's no 5-year dynasty. There's no 15-year dynasty. There's no temporary dynasty that fought its way to power and then got fought out of power. That's not part of Korean history. If you look beyond the big 3, we see these other dynasties as well, which we think of as being shorter lived, but each of them was 600, 500 years. Even Kaya, the baby of the dynasties, the shortest lived of the dynasties, has a record of about 520 years. Again, there's some dispute about the earliest part of this. But Baekje, Goguryeo, and even Puyo were long-lived dynasties. That's the key to Korean history. Look at the Chinese dynasties. The early dynasties here were semi-mythological, so we can't really trust these numbers, but they had some longer dynasties at first. But beginning with the spring and autumn period, you start to see real dynasties. And the longest one you've got is the Han Dynasty, 422 years. But this figure puts the former Han and the later Han together. In the middle, there was that 18-year period where the dynasties fell apart, and then they reinstituted the Han Dynasty. So the 400-year story there is not without some comment. And then the other dynasties, shorter ones, again, a lot of murder and chaos. The Qin Dynasty, the unification, only 14 years. The Sui Dynasty that fought against Goguryeo for so long existed only for 37 years. You don't have that in Korea, these violent, short-lived dynasties the way China does. And of course, in China, you've got alien dynasties, the dynasties by the Mongols and by the Manchus. So by comparison, the Korean dynasties are really long and stable compared to China and Japan and Europe as well, if we pull out Europe and Egypt and other places. So what's the reason for this? Let's look at the Seonbi just a little bit. The highest achievement in Korean government during the mid-Goryeo, late Goryeo, throughout the Joseon Dynasty, the highest achievement was to pass the civil service exam, a written exam, to serve in the government. This was the most solid source of wealth, of income, and of land, more than trading or any other sort of thing. It was also a source of power and prestige. There was a PhD dissertation at the University of Washington several years ago by a young scholar who argued that Koreans value prestige, the Chinese value power, and the Japanese value money. But it's the Koreans for prestige. And you see sometimes you get a Myeongham from somebody, a name card, and they'll have their name and such on the front. And on the back it lists vice president of here, board member here, all the things that they've accomplished. Prestige is very important to the Korean psyche. And there was a military exam. They kept the military in line, which is a very important thing. They Munkwa Mukwa, the civil and the military exam, comprised the Yangban system. And we know that the word Yangban is meaning a aristocrat or a gentleman. The civilian was clearly higher, but they kept the military in line by giving them honors and offices. I don't know if you know this, but of the 250 counties of traditional Korea, half of them were given to military men. They were not military districts, just a military man was serving in a civilian position. So after the Choi military takeover in early Goryeo, Korea learned that it has to keep the military in a good sense of balance. Here's a painting of the military exam with a man on horseback shooting his bow and arrow at the targets around the circle. And here's a picture of the civil exam of people sitting there on the ground taking the exam. So recruitment by examination is just an incredibly sophisticated and civilized thing. The reason for this civilization and this tranquility in society goes beyond Confucianism and Buddhism. It goes way back to these other longer dynasties. There's something deep in Korean psyche. Maybe it's Hongik-ingan or something, but Korean stability goes back a long ways and only reinforced by Buddhism and Confucianism. Samurai culture is the culture of the warrior. the guy with the sword. And they've cleaned it up by saying there's this Zen Buddhist aspect in the meditation and the garden with the raked gravel and the tea ceremony and all these sort of things. But that just covers a brutal kind of culture where honorable death is harakiri, seppuku, cutting open your belly if there's done something to dishonor somebody. Ritual suicide is just ghoulish and awful. Seonbi culture, on the other hand, is just completely different. It's the culture of the scholar and the civilian official. And what does the Seonbi do? They study and study and study so they can take an exam. Here's a reenactment of exam taking, of sitting on your mat in the courtyard of the palace and writing out your answer to a very obscure question about the Chinese classics in brush painting. What do Seonbi do? They're concerned with ancestor ceremonies and these kinds of rituals. This is the hallmark of the Seonbi. It's not seppuku or harakiri or these other sorts of things. The paintings feature Seonbi sitting, talking, drinking tea. There's a unfortunate negative aspect of Seonbi. Some people criticize the Seonbi as being lazy and not working and such, but still, it's more dignified than the samurai who's going to just show up with his sword and cut your head off. When a system falls apart, you have an interesting measure of what that system was like. When the samurai system fell apart, when traditional Japan fell apart, when Commodore Perry came in and Japan started to modernize, you have the story, for example, of the ronin, the masterless samurai, roaming swordsman just out for trouble. And you've got the story of the 47 ronin who their owner, their master, was killed, and they took revenge on the man that forced him to commit suicide. He wasn't killed, he committed suicide. And so the ronin assassinated the man that caused them the trouble in the first place, and then all 47 of them committed suicide. This is the ideal in the samurai system when things start to fall apart. What's the ideal in the Korean system for the Seonbi when things start to fall apart? Impoverished in a new world, not knowing what to do, but they hold on to tradition. They're still going to study. 20th century literature every now and again has a story that features a man that's out of touch with reality because he's still studying like for the exams in the old days. But that's a lot better than killing someone with a sword or committing harakiri. There's another dimension of the samurai, and that is these frustrated warriors wanting to build a military kingdom, empire. It led us into World War II. They first conquered part of China and took over Taiwan. Then they took over Korea. Then they go into Manchuria. Then they go into China. Then they go into Southeast Asia. It's all the samurai tradition printed out in the 20th century. What happens in Korea in the 20th century? You've got this scholarly ambition, these educational ideals. When I first went to Korea in 1965, Korea was desperately poor. It was the poorest country in the world. There may have been some other countries that were equally poor, but nobody was poorer than Korea. Per capita income was $125 per year. That's grindingly poor. And yet, as I talk to people, what you're going to do? I'm going to go to school. I'm going to study. What are you going to study? I'm going to study economics. I'm going to build my country. And these educational ideals were what left over from the Seonbi tradition. The Seonbi tradition looked to Japan like Korea was weak. And Japan criticized Korea as being a loser country with a loser history, with long dynasties that were too long, they were ineffectual and corrupt and inept. And if you've thought this, if you've heard this, this is from the Japanese period. You need to reject this. This is not an accurate view of what Korea is really like. In my opinion, the end of the Joseon dynasty was a failure because all dynasties end in failure eventually. That's why democracy is such a blessing. There's a way of restarting a government without the thing all falling apart. And I've often thought, the power of a monarchy is the power of the monarch. And what if Korea in the 19th century would have had a sejong instead of kojong? How would it have been different? I think it could have been a lot different. The kojong was quite inept, controlled by factions all around him, if there was a strong leader like Sejong, a leader who looked out to the foreign world and learned about it. Sejong sent 17 ambassadors to China to learn about the languages of the world in his day, in the 1440s. If Sejong had been the king in the 1840s, he would have heard about Europe. He would have sent ambassadors. He would have heard about America. He would have sent ambassadors. He would have learned about this, and he would have been better prepared for the world rather than just isolating the way Kojong did. So don't buy the Japanese story about how Korea was weak and inept. It's just not true. Korea, because of the legacy of the Seonbi, is a country of scholarship. It has the highest literacy rate in the world. This is also largely because of Hangul and its convenience in use. It has the highest high school graduation rate in the world. It has the highest college graduation rate in the world. It's number 4 worldwide in numbers of patents. And this last year on a thing called the Bloomberg Index, I didn't know about this, but the Bloomberg says that in creativity, Korea is number 1. Well, and we see it in the cell phones and in the automobiles and the other products that they are producing. Koreans are smart. They're well educated. Why? It's the Seonbi tradition that carries on. So that's my view of it. That there's the top 10 view of the why Korea has a long, peaceful society. Number 8 is linked to the Seonbi culture of civilian control of the court. They didn't let the samurai or the military take over. And let me know if you're convinced. We're going to have some question and answers here. I'm always happy to talk with the Knox teachers. Let me know if you agree or disagree. You've got to look at all 10 videos to get the full story. But send me an email to frogoutsidethewell@gmail.com. And I hope to hear from you all and hope to see you again sometime soon. See you. 안녕하세요.